It was a quiet, overwhelming period for Rebecca at the shelter, as the days passed in a blur of uncertainty. She found herself retreating further from the other children, her thoughts tangled in the recent events of her life. The other kids tried to reach out to her, making small talk, but Rebecca wasn't ready for their friendship. Not yet. Her only constant was Max, the dog who had stayed by her side through it all. His loyalty, unconditional and steadfast, was her lifeline in this new, confusing world. Max was her shadow, always close, always ready to offer comfort. When the anxiety would rise in Rebecca's chest, Max would nudge her hand gently, his soft nose brushing her palm, as if to say, "I'm here." No words were needed between them. Max understood her in a way no one else could. One afternoon, as Rebecca sat in the shelter's courtyard with Max resting beside her, Carmen, a kind-hearted staff member, approached. She didn't sit too close, respecting Rebecca's space, but making sure she knew she was there. "How are you feeling today?" Carmen asked, her tone warm but never intrusive. Rebecca shrugged, her eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't want to talk, but Carmen didn't push her. She simply offered words of comfort. "It's okay to feel unsure," Carmen said gently. "This place can feel strange at first, but you're safe here. No one will hurt you." Rebecca glanced at Max, who was lying with his head in her lap. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of safety Carmen spoke of. It was faint, but it was there. She nodded, a small gesture that Carmen seemed to understand. "I've seen a lot of kids come through these doors," Carmen continued. "Some stay quiet like you, some want to talk right away, but everyone takes their own time." Rebecca didn't respond, but Carmen's words hung in the air, offering her a sense of permission to move at her own pace. It was a relief to know she wasn't being rushed, that she could go through this process in her own way, even if it was slow and uncertain. As days turned into weeks, Rebecca found herself gradually opening up, though not in any large way. She would sit a little closer to the other kids during meals. Her eyes no longer darted nervously when someone spoke to her. She nodded when Carmen asked how she was doing, and even smiled ever so slightly when Max nuzzled her hand, encouraging her to play with him. Max remained her constant, guiding her through each small step forward. She still had a long way to go, but every day at the shelter felt a little less frightening and a little more like home. Then one quiet afternoon, Carmen came into the room where Rebecca was sitting, her expression a mixture of hope and concern. Rebecca looked up from the floor, tracing circles with her finger, and Carmen spoke softly. "There's a family that wants to meet you," she said. "The Simons. They're interested in adopting you." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had always dreamed of, yet somehow feared. She had never imagined that anyone would want to adopt her, not with the weight of her past and the baggage she carried. By baggage, she didn't just mean her past, she meant Max. He had been her constant, her protector, and the idea of leaving him behind, even for a short time, seemed unthinkable. "They're a kind couple," Carmen continued, kneeling down to meet Rebecca's gaze. "But they don't like animals. I know Max is important to you, but they said they'll come back for him later. You'd go first. It could be a fresh start." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. Max had been by her side through everything. Abandoning him, even temporarily, was beyond her comprehension. She looked at him, his head resting on the floor beside her, his eyes soft and trusting. "They promise they'll take him later, right?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely a whisper. Carmen hesitated for a moment, but nodded. "Yes, they promised. You won't be apart for long." Rebecca reached down and gently ruffled Max's fur, whispering to him, "I'll come back for you, I promise." Later that afternoon, the Simons arrived, as Carmen had described them, warm, polite, and clearly eager to make a connection. Mrs. Simons, a woman with kind eyes, knelt beside Rebecca. "You must be Rebecca," she said gently. "We've heard wonderful things about you." Rebecca managed a small smile. "Can I bring Max with me?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety as she glanced at Max. Mr. Simons, a tall man with graying hair, exchanged a brief look with his wife before replying softly, "Max will stay here for now. We'll come back for him after you've settled in. It's just easier that way." Rebecca wanted to protest. She wanted to demand they take Max with them, but there was something in the warmth of their voices that made her hesitate. They were offering her something she'd never had, a home, a chance to belong somewhere. With a heavy heart, she agreed. "I'll come back for him soon," she murmured, reaching down to Max one last time. Life with the Simons was different. Rebecca was adjusting to the routines of a family, something that had always felt foreign to her. Dinner times were quiet but pleasant. They asked her how school was going, encouraged her to try new hobbies, and treated her with a kindness she had never known. Despite this, a dull ache lingered in her heart, one she couldn't shake. Every night, she would lie in bed and think of Max, alone at the orphanage. She missed his nudge, the warmth of his presence beside her, the comfort he brought simply by being there. It had been 2 months since she left the shelter, and with each passing day, her thoughts of Max grew more insistent. Each time she brought up the idea of bringing Max home, the Simons would change the subject. "We'll see about Max soon, sweetheart," Mrs. Simons would say with a quick smile, but the conversation never went any further. Mr. Simons would nod along, avoiding eye contact. Rebecca knew what was happening. The promise to bring Max home was slipping away, lost in the comfortable routine of her new life. But she couldn't forget him. The thought of him waiting at the orphanage gnawed at her heart. Meanwhile, Max remained there, by the gate, each day watching the road, hoping to see Rebecca's familiar face. Whenever a car pulled up, his ears would perk up, and his tail would wag excitedly, only to droop when it wasn't her. But no matter how many days passed, Max never stopped waiting. Rebecca's guilt weighed heavily on her, but no matter how much she tried to focus on her new life, the promise she made to Max never left her. One quiet night, Rebecca lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible, the thoughts of Max filling her mind. She missed him, his presence, his protection, the way he made her feel safe. Her life with the Simons was comfortable, but something was missing. It was Max. The bond between them was too strong to ignore. The thought of him waiting at the orphanage, confused and lonely, just as she had been once, stirred something deep inside her. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the Simons. Her heart raced as she moved quickly, her feet silent on the wooden floors. The streets outside were empty, bathed in moonlight. She ran, guided only by the memory of the path to the orphanage. When she finally arrived, the sight of the building took her breath away. And there, by the gate, was Max, curled up with his head resting on his paw. His eyes were closed, but when Rebecca called his name, his head shot up. His ears perked, and his tail began to wag furiously. When he saw her, he leaped to his feet, his body trembling with excitement. Without hesitation, Rebecca sprinted toward him, her heart soaring with relief. But just as she stepped onto the road, a flash of light caught her eye. A motorcycle was speeding toward her, its engine roaring. Time seemed to slow as the motorcycle drew closer. Panic surged through Rebecca, freezing her in place. Then, without thinking, Max lunged forward. He threw himself against her, knocking her out of the way of the bike. The motorcycle screeched past, and the impact sent Max flying, his body tumbling across the pavement with a sickening thud. Rebecca hit the ground hard but scrambled to her feet, her heart racing in terror. "Max," she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. She ran to him, her legs weak, and collapsed beside his limp body. Max lay still, his breath shallow and labored. But when he opened his eyes, they locked onto hers. Despite the pain, his gaze still held that familiar warmth, the same unshakable love he had always shown her. Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she cradled his head in her lap. "No, Max, please stay with me," she whispered, her voice shaking with grief. His tail gave one final feeble wag before his body relaxed. His eyes closed slowly, and with one last breath, he let go. The night air was thick with sorrow as Rebecca sobbed, holding Max tightly. She had lost him, her protector, her constant companion. The world around her seemed to crumble. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.